Hey, well, good afternoon, everybody. Hey, I'm glad you're able to join me this morning as we continue our study. And we're going to be looking into actually Psalms, not Psalms 49, but actually Psalms 50. We'll be looking into, what I consider to be one of the premier Psalms when it comes to talking about David, when he talks about God's judgment. So grab your Bibles, we'll get started. But before we do, let me just ask you this one question. Have you ever been in a situation where you moved and came into a room, or maybe you saw something for the first time and you go, what in the world is this? There's a couple ways in which you can say it, like I just mentioned, or, whoa, what is this? In both instances, we're going to find, as we look into Psalms 50, that expression. You're going to see things and you're going to go, what in the world is this? As though, something's wrong. And then in the same way, you're going to be taken back by, whoa, what is this? That's going to be David's reaction as he records for us in Psalms 50, God calling into judgment. And, we're going to be also, when we do that, it mentions Mount Zion. And it's quite interesting is that from Zion, perfect and beautiful, God shines forth. And we're going to see, as I have some video taken from my vacation out west, images of Mount Zion, its grandeur. And with that in mind, we're going to talk about, how in fact God is going to do what he's going to do and the expression that he has as he opens up. So let's get started as we start with Psalms 50, verse 1. Well, the mighty one, God, the Lord, speaks and summons the earth. From the rising of the sun to where it sets, from Zion, perfect in beauty, God shines forth. And so the idea is when you look at Zion, its grandeur, its beauty, as you can see here, we're coming through a tunnel, out of the darkness, and then all of a sudden into this explosive, mountain range known as Zion National Park. And just as it says here, from Zion, perfect in beauty, God shines forth. Our God comes and will not be silent. Fire devours before him. Around him, a tempest rages. He summons the heavens above and the earth that he may judge his people. So as you saw Mount Zion come into view through that tunnel, all of a sudden you realize how grandeur, how mighty is the one who, what in the world, who did all of this? And when you read here in Psalms 50 that God calls his people into judgment, all of a sudden you realize how powerful and magnificent God is. Well, let's continue here as we look into verse 5. It says, gather to me the consecrated people who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And so God calls forth, he's asking to be brought into his presence those who have had a covenant with him. In this particular case, he's referring to the Jewish people. Now, we can take this and apply it into the New Testament as well, because we have a covenant with Christ. Matter of fact, we oftentimes remember that covenant when we take communion, when Jesus says, this is the new covenant in my blood. Take it and drink of it as often as you will in remembrance of me, to remember the covenant. The heavens proclaim his righteousness, for he is a God of justice. Listen, my people, and I will speak. I will testify against you, Israel. I am God, your God. So God calls forth from the heavens, making a proclamation, bring my consecrated people before me. Now, as Christians, we know that we are going to be saved from condemnation. However, there is the Bema judgment, and that is where we will come before God, and we will have to give, an account of all that God has given us. What have we done with our lives, with the skills and the abilities, the opportunities that God has given us? Now remember, as we look at the grandeur of Zion National Park, it demonstrates his power, his majesty. You are only humbled as you come through that tunnel and you're in the very presence of these majestic mountains. So in verse 8, we pick up here, I bring no charge against you concerning your sacrifices or concerning your burnt offerings, which are ever before me. So the Jewish people were very good at making their sacrifices. They would annually come to the temple. They would make their sacrifices. God is not holding that against him. That's not his beef. We'll read on here. I have no need of a bull from the stall or from the goats from the pans. For every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills, they are mine. In other words, Jesus is saying, or I should say, and this is Jesus speaking here, and we'll get to that. Jesus is saying, I don't need to be fed by the bulls. I don't need the blood of goats. I'm not thirsty. That's not my requirement. All these animals of the entire world, the animals, the insects, they're all mine. And I've given them to you to make sacrifice so that you can join in fellowship in meal with me. Now, Jesus said the same thing. Remember, in the communion, he took that bread and he broke it. And he said, this is my body, which has been broken for you. Take and eat. He then took the cup. He says, this is my blood, which has been poured out for you. And as we're a communion, a common union coming together. Well, in the Old Testament, the common union was the sacrifices that they made. They would come before God and they would make this sacrifice and they would eat a portion of that was offered to God upon the altar. And again, God did not eat the animals upon the altar, but he provided a means by which he could have fellowship with mankind. Verse 10, for every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains, and the insects in the field, they are mine. If I were hungry, well, I would tell you. For the world is mine, and all that is in it. Do I eat the flesh of bulls, or do I drink the blood of goats? And the answer, of course, is no. The pagan gods and the pagan nations, they sacrifice as though their gods were hungry. Jesus is not. Sacrifice thank offerings to God. Fulfill your vows to the Most High. Again, these are offerings of thanksgiving. God, what have you done for me? Thank you. And you make these offerings. And call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you will honor me. This is the covenant that he entered in with Jerusalem, with Israel, and this is the covenant he comes and honors with us. Let us keep our vows of giving thanksgiving offerings to Christ. As we move on to 16, but the wicked person, God says, what right have you to recite my law or take my covenant on your lips? In other words, he's saying those of you who are not fulfilling what you're supposed to, not that you're not making the sacrifices, but you are in fact not keeping the law. You are not keeping the covenant that I have with you, that this is how you are to live, so that you should become actually a light to the nations. You hate my instruction, and you cast my words behind you. When you see a thief, you join with him, and you throw your lot in with the adulterers. You say, let's go. You use your mouth for evil, and you harness your tongue for deceit. In other words, you are training your mouth to be deceptive. You are perfecting your skills. Instead of praises, you're using your mouth to be deceptive. And you think you can deceive me? As we continue on in verse 20, we read, you sit and you testify against your brother, against your fellow Jew, and you slander your own mother's son. Blood makes no difference to you. You are all about yourself. Even though you come and you make your sacrifices at the temple, you are far from me. Verse 21, when you did these things, I kept silent. You thought I was exactly like you. but I now arraign you and set my accusations before you. I am bringing you into judgment. Consider this, you who forgot God, or I will tear you to pieces, with no one to rescue you. When you look at what God has done, when you look at the judgment in National Park, creation of these huge mountain ranges created by the flood, which was God's judgment, and they serve as a reminder to us today that God is majestic and he is righteous and that he will bring all of us into judgment. If we know his covenant, if we walk with him, well, we won't be condemned, but we will give an account for the lives in which he has given us. How have we used them? Consider this, you who forgot God, or I will tear you to pieces with no one to rescue you. Those who sacrifice thank offerings, they honor me. And so we have it as we can, that God says, if you have forgotten me, then you are in jeopardy of judgment. With that said, he also says that I will provide salvation. I will show salvation, a way for which you can escape. God is merciful. God is powerful and majestic. Well, that's what I have for you today as we end, with Psalm 50. And we'll pick up next time with Psalm 51. And that's going to be David's account.